The night was quiet in Pinebrook, a sleepy town where little ever happened after dark. Inside the police station, Officer Megan Carter leaned back in her chair, absent-mindedly flipping through a report while the low hum of the vending machine buzzed in the background. Midnight was still an hour away, and she was thinking more about the stale donut on her desk than about anything urgent. Then the scratching came. It was faint, but sharp just enough to cut through the silence. Megan looked up, alert. A few seconds passed, then it came again, scratching and a low whimper. She stood and approached the glass doors of the lobby. The outside lights cast a pale glow over the steps, and as she stepped closer, her heart skipped. A large German shepherd stood there, panting hard, his fur caked in mud. At first glance, he looked like he had escaped from somewhere lost, maybe hungry. But something else caught Megan's eye. Draped over the front of his body, clinging to the vest strapped tightly to his back, was a little girl. Megan's training kicked in. She yanked open the door and dropped to her knees. Hey, sweetie, can you hear me?" she asked, voice urgent but gentle. The girl didn't respond. Her face was pale and her lips slightly blue. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second. Before closing again, her arms had deep scrapes, and her hair was knotted and tangled with leaves. She looked like she hadn't bathed or eaten in days. The dog growled low as Megan moved her hands toward the child. Not out of aggression, but as if to warn her to be careful. Megan nodded slowly. "It's okay, boy," she said softly. "I'm trying to help her." The dog stepped back a pace, but kept his eyes locked on the girl. Two other officers, Officer Lyle and Deputy Rollins, rushed over as Megan lifted the girl gently into her arms. "Where did they come from?" Lyle asked. Stunned, double quotes, "No idea," Megan answered. "Call EMS now." As they laid the girl on a blanket in the station's small break room, the German shepherd paced in circles, never more than a few feet from her. He let out short, urgent whines, almost like he was trying to speak. His vest was plain black, torn in several places. No badge, no department logo, just a rugged, scratched-out rectangle where something had once been sewn. Megan crouched down in front of him. "You're not just a stray," she murmured. "You brought her here. You knew where to go." When the paramedics arrived, the girl was still unconscious but breathing. They examined her quickly, checking for signs of injury or illness. The lead EMT shook his head. "She's dehydrated. Probably hasn't eaten properly in a while. We'll stabilize her and take her in. No signs of trauma, which is good, but she's exhausted." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, the dog tried to follow. One of the medics gently pushed him back. "Sorry, boy, you can't ride in the ambulance." That was when the girl stirred. Just as they were about to roll her out, her hand reached out, grabbing Clover's vest. Her lips moved. Megan leaned in, barely catching the faint whisper, "Clover." Everyone stopped. The medics looked up. "What did she say?" Rollins asked. Megan repeated it. "Clover," she said. "Clover." The dog lifted his head and looked at Megan. That moment was enough to convince her. "He goes with her," Megan said firmly. "He's not just a dog. He's the reason she's alive." No one argued. Once the ambulance left, Megan sat back at her desk and stared at the empty lobby. Clover had appeared like a ghost, congealed, tired, and dragging a mystery no one had seen coming. A little girl with no name, a dog with no ID, and no clear story, but Megan could feel it. Something much bigger had just walked through the station doors, and soon, everything in their small town and beyond was going to change. At the county hospital, the girl was placed under observation, surrounded by soft lights and the quiet beeping of machines. She hadn't said another word since whispering the dog's name, Clover. Nurses moved carefully around her, trying not to startle her. She kept her eyes open, but distant, as if part of her was still trapped in a place far away. Officer Megan Carter stood outside the glass window of her hospital room, arms crossed and mind racing. Beside her sat Clover. Now, resting but alert. He hadn't left the girl's side once during the ambulance ride. When they tried to keep him out of the building, the little girl had cried for the first time, not loudly, but enough that the nurses gave in and let the dog stay. A hospital social worker, Diane Parlow, stood next to Megan, holding a notepad. "She won't give her name?" Megan asked quietly. Diane shook her head. "She hasn't spoken at all. Doesn't respond to questions. No sign of injury that would explain her silence, at least. Not physical, but her body language. She's afraid." Megan looked through the window again. The girl was holding Clover's ear gently in her small fingers, like it was a lifeline. Diane continued. We've taken photos and sent her image through the missing children's database. So far, no confirmed matches. But if she's from out of state, that might explain the delay. Megan frowned. And what about the dog? I ran his microchip through the National Canine Registry, Diane said, flipping a page. He was part of a federal unit, Department of Homeland Security, assigned to a joint task force based in Tennessee. Wait, federal? Diane nodded. Yeah, but the unit was disbanded 2 years ago. The file says he was listed as decommissioned and marked as retired. No further records after that. Megan turned her eyes to Clover. He didn't look retired. Even in his exhausted state, there was something sharp in his posture. He was trained, focused, loyal. And now, Megan wondered, what had he been doing? Since that unit was shut down, back at the Pinebrook station, Detective James Rowan had been called in to take over the investigation. A man with 20 years of experience and a long memory. Rowan didn't talk much, but when he listened hard. He walked into the hospital room just before sunrise, quietly taking in the sight of the girl and the dog curled up together. Hasn't spoken, Megan said to him. Rowan nodded. That's all right. Sometimes silence says more than words. He handed Megan a folder. Inside were reports from the old task force Clover had belonged to. It had been investigating a suspected trafficking ring operating across state lines, using rural and hard-to-access terrain to avoid detection. The last mission before the unit was disbanded involved an off-grid compound deep in the Appalachians. But it had ended without any arrests. Mission was called off, Rowan explained. Lack of evidence. But something about it always bugged me, like we were just scratching the surface. And now this dog shows up. With her, Megan said slowly. You think it's connected? Rowan gave a slight nod. I'd bet on it. Dogs don't work alone. Somebody trained him. Somebody trusted him. But more than that, this girl, she didn't run to a random building. He brought her to a police station. That tells me he knew exactly what he was doing. Clover looked up as if he'd understood every word. Later that afternoon, a nurse came to speak with Diane. The girl had finally drawn something on a notepad. When Megan saw the paper, her breath caught. It was a rough but clear picture of a forest, a long gravel road, and a wooden gate, with tall fences. But the detail that stood out most was what was drawn behind those fences: small buildings. And what looked like people, some sitting, some lying down. Inside what looked like sheds. She remembers it, Megan whispered. The girl may not have had the words yet, but the drawing told enough. She'd come from somewhere dark, somewhere hidden. And she hadn't been the only one there. Megan looked at Clover again. You came for help, she said quietly. And now we have to figure out where you came from, before it's too late for the others. Detective James Rowan sat in his office, surrounded by scattered files, half-drunk coffee, and a wall of photographs pinned in a growing pattern of leads. It had been less than 24 hours since the girl had arrived at the station, and already the case was unfolding into something much larger than anyone had anticipated. He stared at the drawing she'd made, now pinned beside a map of the Appalachian region. Across the room, Officer Megan Carter entered with her tablet in hand. We just got something from the missing persons database, she said, her tone urgent. Rowan looked up. Is it her? Possibly. There's a girl listed as missing from Chattanooga, same age, similar facial structure. Name is Lily Whitmore. She disappeared 2 years ago while playing in her front yard. 2 years? Rowan asked. That's a long time for a child to be gone and not found. Megan nodded grimly. The photo's a bit outdated, but the eyes, they match. The mother's been contacted and is already en route. Rowan turned back to the map. And no sign of the place she drew. Not yet, Megan admitted. But we're cross-referencing the sketch with satellite maps and old forestry reports. A lot of this region hasn't been surveyed in decades. Just then, a low bark echoed from the hallway. Clover had been wandering the station, uneasy without the girl, who was still being kept at the hospital. When he heard Megan's voice, he padded into the office and sat beside her. You think he remembers how to get back? Megan asked, half joking. Rowan looked down at the dog and said, I wouldn't be surprised if he does. There was a knock at the door. Officer Lyle stepped in, holding an evidence bag. Found this in the dog's vest. Rowan took the small plastic bag. Inside was a miniature flash drive, slightly bent and wrapped in faded tape. Megan blinked. Where was that hiding? Inside the inner lining, Lyle said, stitched in pretty tight. We missed it at first. They plugged the flash drive into Rowan's laptop. The screen flickered, and a series of encrypted folders appeared. Only one opened a video file with a strange name. Megan hit play. The footage was grainy, shot from a low angle, likely from a camera mounted on Clover himself. It showed the dog creeping through thick woods, ducking under branches, and moving silently toward a clearing. The camera shook slightly, then steadied as he paused near a series of cabins surrounded by a high, rusty fence. Figures moved inside. Adults, a few children, all with subdued expressions. There was no laughter, no noise, only the quiet shuffle of people walking in lines, guarded by others holding radios and wearing civilian clothes. Megan felt her stomach turn. That's the place. It has to be. Rowan paused the video and zoomed in on one frame. A man stood outside one of the cabins, talking to someone off-screen. His face, though partly blurred, was just clear enough for recognition software to scan. Rowan ran the image through the federal database. After a tense minute, the match popped up. Greg Tolman, he read aloud. Former military contractor, went off the radar 4 years ago. Suspected of working with underground networks, but never charged. Megan leaned over his shoulder. You think he's running that compound? Rowan nodded. Or at least guarding it. And if he's involved, we're not dealing with just a few missing people. This could be organized. Back at the hospital, the girl now confirmed to be Lily. Whitmore remained quiet, but her eyes lit up when Megan brought Clover in for a visit. The dog gently rested his head on her lap, and for the first time, Lily smiled. Megan sat beside her. We're going to find the others, she said softly. Because of you and Clover. Lily didn't respond, but she reached into the sheets and pulled out a second drawing. This one showed a watchtower, a long fence, and something small barely noticeable in the corner, a red flag with 3 white stars. Rowan examined it later that evening. Tennessee militia symbol, he said. Used by a few isolated groups. Not illegal, but they tend to stay off the radar. He tapped the photo of Tolman. Until now, what had started as a mystery dog at the door was now unraveling into a dangerous operation stretching across state lines. Rowan looked at the map again. It was time to act. Back at the Pinebrook station, Officer Megan Carter couldn't shake the image of the little girl's drawing. She had studied it over and over, the forest, the gravel road, the strange fences. It was haunting in its simplicity, like a quiet scream on paper. It didn't take a professional artist to understand what the girl was trying to say. She had come from a place where no child should ever be. But it was Clover who held Megan's attention the most. The dog had barely slept since they brought the girl to the hospital. He sat by the exit of the station now, eyes fixed on the front doors, as if waiting for someone or something. Megan knelt beside him, brushing some dried dirt from his vest. That was when her fingers caught on something she hadn't noticed before. Inside the lining of the collar, just beneath a loose flap, was a small stitch that didn't quite match the rest. She gently tugged at it, and a thin pocket opened. Tucked inside was a tiny, sealed plastic packet, no larger than a matchbox. Inside it, miraculously dry, was a flash drive. Megan's breath caught in her throat. You clever dog, she whispered. You brought evidence. She didn't waste time. She brought the flash drive straight to Rowan, who was still poring over reports. He raised an eyebrow when she handed it to him. Where did this come from? Its collar, she replied. Hidden, sewn into the lining. Rowan didn't hesitate. He plugged it into his secure laptop, eyes narrowing as the files loaded. Inside were 3 short video clips, all low quality, but enough to make the hairs on his neck stand. The first showed a wide aerial shot of a dense forest, with what looked like a compound at the center, several squat buildings, old trailers, and fenced-in areas, partially covered by trees. The second video was more disturbing. It was a shaky walkthrough shot, seemingly taken by a body camera. It showed narrow rooms, bunk-style sleeping arrangements, and multiple small figures, people sitting on the floor in silence. Some looked up at the camera. None spoke. The third clip was brief but important. A close-up of a man's face. Hardened, weathered, with a jagged scar across his cheek. His expression was calm, almost smug, as he stood beside a steel door. Someone had paused the video at that moment, and a frame grab had been saved as a separate image file. Rowan immediately ran facial recognition software. It didn't take long. Name's Garrett Rayner, he said, reading the result aloud. Suspected of running unlicensed labor camps out west years ago. Never convicted. Moved east about 3 years ago, then vanished. He was on the FBI's interest list for a while, but dropped off when leads dried up. Megan leaned over his shoulder. That's the same face from the girl's drawing. I bet she remembers him. Rowan nodded. This confirms what I was afraid of. We're looking at a compound. Remote, controlled, and from the looks of it, holding more than just her. He reached for the phone, dialing the regional FBI field office. It's time to bring in the feds. While Rowan handled the call, Megan returned to the dog. She sat beside him on the bench in the station's side hallway. He turned his head slightly, as if acknowledging her presence. I don't know how you got out of there, she said softly, but you did. You got her out. You brought us proof. You might be the only reason this whole place gets shut down. Clover didn't move, but there was something steady in the way he looked at Hercom, and unblinking, as if he understood the weight of what was coming next. The FBI responded swiftly. Once they saw the footage, they dispatched a team to Pinebrook by late afternoon. Special Agent Claire Donovan, sharp-eyed and precise in her movements, took the lead. She watched the clips in silence, asked questions, then requested access to all related files and interviews. After viewing the girl's drawing and the videos from Clover's collar, she turned to Megan and Rowan. This isn't a local matter anymore, she said. We've been chasing this operation for years. You just gave us the opening we needed. Do you think the girl's compound is still active? Megan asked. Claire nodded grimly. If they're still there, they're not there by choice. We move fast. We move quiet. A plan was already forming. They had a rough location from the GPS data hidden in the video's metadata. It led them deep into the Appalachian backwoodsland few dared to explore, let alone patrol. The quiet dog who had once served silently was now the key witness. His instincts had done more than just protect a little girl. He had exposed a secret that could bring justice to many more. And the next move was no longer a question of if but when. The plan came together faster than anyone expected. By sunrise the next day, federal agents, state police, and tactical response units were already on the move. A satellite map showed the rough location of the suspected compound deep in the Appalachian foothills, beyond any paved roads. There were no power lines, no listed structures, and no residents registered in the area. But the GPS data embedded in Clover's video files pointed to something. Whatever's out there, Agent Claire Donovan said, it was built to stay hidden. Detective Rowan stood over the map with her and nodded slowly. They've gone off-grid. No cell towers, no signal. They've cut themselves off on purpose. And we're cutting in, she said. A helicopter would drop one team near the ridge. Another would come in by ground, hiking miles through rough terrain. No one knew how large the compound was, or how many people might be inside, but they prepared for the worst. Megan stood beside Clover, as the teams packed up and prepared to roll out. She had been included in the mission as a liaison, familiar with both the dog and the girl. Clover, though technically retired and not officially on duty, was going to nose the way, she told Claire. Claire hesitated. Are you sure he can handle it? He's already handled more than most humans could, Megan replied. And if there are other children still inside, Clover will find them. Permission was granted. Clover was fitted with a lightweight camera harness, this time broadcasting live to the command unit. His loyalty, intelligence, and uncanny ability to track might be the difference between life and death. The air was cool as they set out that morning. The helicopter lifted into the sky with agents on board while the ground team, including Megan and Clover, started their hike along a washed-out logging road. They moved quickly, but quietly, weaving through thick trees and steep slopes. Hours passed before the first sign appeared. Clover stopped abruptly near a patch of brush, nose in the air. Then, without hesitation, he darted left off the planned trail. He's tracking, Megan said. Follow him. They followed the dog through narrow passes and across a shallow creek until he stopped at what looked like nothing more than a moss-covered rock wall. But behind the brush, a faint wooden structure peeked through. A gate, old, but sturdy. Beyond, it wire fencing and faded warning signs were just visible through the trees. This is it, Megan whispered. This is the place from Lily's drawings. The command was given to hold position. Drones were launched above to scan for movement, and agents reported back what they saw: 7 structures, 2 towers, and several individuals moving between buildings. From the images, it was clear this was a compound, and it was active. Within the hour, a plan was launched. The team split into 2 units. One would approach from the eastern slope. The other, including Megan and Clover, would move from the west, at exactly 3:17 p.m. The signal was given. The teams moved in. There was no gunfire, just silence and speed. Agents breached gates, entered cabins, and quickly secured the perimeter. People were found inside 10 adults, 6 children. Some were in rooms, some outside. None resisted. Most looked dazed, like they had been living in slow motion for years. Megan followed Clover into one of the smaller structures. Inside he barked once sharp and focused. She stepped in and saw 2 boys sitting on the floor, no older than 8, holding each other tightly. Their eyes were wide with fear. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling beside them. "You're safe now." They didn't speak, but when Clover sat beside them, both boys reached out and touched his fur like they already knew him. One of them whispered, "He was there. He helped us." Outside, agents gathered the people and began medical evaluations. A few of the adults had been workers, possibly forced, possibly not. The leaders of the compound had fled just before the raid, alerted by lookouts. But enough had been captured to start building a strong case. Rowan stepped beside Megan as she watched a medic wrap a blanket around one of the rescued children. "We're just beginning," he said. Megan nodded. "But we're not too late." Clover sat quietly. His work not yet finished, but his purpose fulfilled for now. What he had uncovered with one quiet act of bravery had shattered a hidden world. Wide open. The forest was still recovering from the storm of footsteps and shouting voices. Hours after the raid, the compound stood quiet, its hidden world finally exposed. Wooden cabins, once sealed tightly, now had their doors wide open. For the first time in years, sunlight was reaching inside. The children and adults rescued from the compound were loaded into vans and taken to a nearby federal center equipped for trauma care and temporary housing. Medical teams, therapists, and agents surrounded them, working carefully to ease them back into a world most of them hadn't seen in years. Back on site, Officer Megan Carter remained behind with Agent Claire Donovan and Detective Rowan. Clover stood beside them, still alert, though visibly tired. He had not left Megan's side since the rescue. In many ways, he had become the bridge between the people who had suffered and those trying to help them. "We found more than we expected," Claire said, flipping through a notepad filled with scribbled updates. Generators, radio equipment, underground storage. They weren't just hiding. They were preparing to stay hidden forever. "Any sign of the leaders?" Rowan asked. "Gone. Before we arrived," Claire replied, "but not far. Our air team spotted tracks leading away from the northern edge of the camp. Looks like 2 men left on foot with supplies. We're tracking them now." Megan glanced at Clover. "You think he'd pick up the trail again?" Claire nodded. "If there's anyone who can find them, it's him." They allowed Clover to rest for a few hours before giving him water and rechecking his harness. As soon as the team began moving toward the trail in the woods, Clover perked up, ears forward, nose twitching. He didn't need words. He understood what was needed. The trail led them through a narrow creek and across a dense ridge. The men had moved fast, but not quiet. Food wrappers and broken branches gave them away. After almost 3 miles, Clover barked sharply and veered left toward a rock formation. The agents followed quickly, and soon they spotted a makeshift camp. 2 men crouched near a fire, one holding a radio. They never saw the team coming. Within minutes, the 2 were in custody. One was confirmed as Garrett Rayner, the man seen in the footage from Clover's collar. The other was Greg Tolman, the former contractor suspected of running the compound from the shadows. "You have no idea what you're interrupting," Tolman said as he was led away in cuffs. "Oh, we have a good idea," Rowan muttered, "and we're just getting started." Back at the Federal Center, Lily Whitmore was reunited with her mother. The moment was quiet, emotional, and filled with tears. Her mother dropped to her knees, clutching Lily like she would never let go again. Lily didn't say much, but she didn't need to. Her eyes lit up when she saw Clover walk into the room. She ran to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. He licked her hands softly. "He never left me," she whispered for the first time in front of others. Even when it was scary. Clover stayed with Lily and her mother during their first night at the center. Megan and Rowan watched from the hallway. Both moved in silence. "This dog has done more than most people ever could," Rowan said. Megan smiled. "And he didn't even need backup." Federal agents worked through the night, gathering files, collecting digital evidence, and interviewing those rescued. What they found inside the compound confirmed years of quiet suspicion, records of names, coded logs, and files that traced back to other locations. The compound was just one part of something larger. But this one had fallen. Thanks to Clover. As dawn broke, Megan stood outside with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the forest. Clover sat beside her, his eyes on the horizon. as if watching for whatever might come next. "You've earned your rest, hero," she said softly, patting his back. But Clover didn't rest. Not yet. His job wasn't done. Somewhere in his mind, something told him the mission wasn't over. And as long as there were others still out there somewhere, he'd be ready. The weeks following the raid were a whirlwind of activity. Federal agents worked tirelessly, piecing together the threads of a network that had remained hidden in the shadows for years. Court cases were prepared, interviews conducted, and families reunited. But at the heart of it all was the little girl named Lily, and the dog who had brought her to safety. Clover. Lily's recovery was slow but steady. In the beginning, she barely spoke, often retreating into silence when overwhelmed by questions. But with time, and with Clover always by her side, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. At the rehabilitation center, she slowly began to tell parts of her story. She described the place with no clocks, where time seemed to stand still. She spoke of the lady with the yellow coat, the only person who had shown her kindness, the one who fed Clover secretly when no one else would. Lily told of nights when Clover would nudge her food closer, or quietly pull her to a window to look outside when no one was watching. Most of all, she remembered how Clover had been her protector, how he had waited patiently, quietly planning their escape for months. Detective Rowan and Agent Donovan sat with Lily during one of these sessions. The room was calm, sun filtering gently through the windows. But Lily's eyes held something fierce. "He was always there," she said softly. "When they shouted, when they locked the doors, Clover never left." Her words were proof of the dog's intelligence and loyalty, but they also opened a window into the horrors they were trying to uncover. The compound wasn't just a place where people were held, it was a place of fear, control, and silence. The investigation uncovered more than just the compound. Through digital evidence and witness accounts, authorities identified other sites and individuals involved in the trafficking network. It was a sprawling operation that spanned several states. But the raid had dealt a serious blow. Back at the police station, Officer Megan Carter found herself thinking often about Clover. The dog had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest places, courage and loyalty could shine through. One afternoon, as Megan walked through the halls, she overheard a conversation. A local news crew was interviewing Agent Donovan about the raid's success and the role Clover had played. "He's more than a dog," Donovan said. "He's a hero. And his actions have saved lives, including a little girl's who might never have been found otherwise." Megan smiled quietly. "I think he knows that too." Clover, meanwhile, was adjusting to a new routine. Officially retired from federal duty, he was now part of the Pinebrook police family. Officer Carter had adopted him, giving him a home filled with warmth and care he'd never known before. The first time Clover returned to the station wearing a vest with his name stitched clearly on it. Officers gathered around, clapping softly. He wagged his tail, pride shining in his eyes. Lily visited the station often, always accompanied by her mother and Clover. She was still fragile, but every visit brought new laughter, new stories, and new hope. One day, Megan watched as Clover and Lily played in the station's yard. The little girl threw a ball, and Clover sprinted after it with the same energy and spirit he'd shown the night he brought her to safety. Megan thought about the road ahead. There would be trials, healing, and rebuilding. But for now, there was peace, and it was all thanks to a dog who refused to give up. Months had passed since the raid that shook the quiet Appalachian foothills. The town of Pinebrook was slowly healing, and so were the lives touched by the dark secret uncovered in those hidden woods. For Lily Whitmore, the little girl who had once been silent and frightened, the days now held new light and a future filled with hope. Officer Megan Carter sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching Clover nap by the fireplace. The dog had settled into his new home with a calm dignity, a hero who carried the weight of what he had done but now enjoyed peace. Megan often thought about how Clover had somehow known exactly where to go and what to do, the kind of instinct no training could teach. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. It was the hospital, calling with news about Lily's latest checkup. The doctors were optimistic. Her physical wounds had healed, and even the emotional scars were starting to fade, thanks to counseling and the love of her mother and Clover. Megan smiled as she hung up. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had become a police officer in the first place, to help people who couldn't help themselves. Later that day, the police station held a small ceremony in Clover's honor. It was informal. Officers, agents, and community members gathered in the parking lot, the sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. Agent Claire Donovan gave a speech praising the dog's bravery and the teamwork that had led to the raid's success. Megan watched Clover as he stood proudly beside her. His eyes scanned the crowd, calm and wise. The local news captured the moment, and soon Clover's story spread far beyond Pinebrook. But the dog cared little for the attention. What mattered was the bond between him and Lily, the girl who had trusted him enough to escape, and the dog who had risked everything to bring her to safety. In the weeks that followed, Lily's voice grew stronger. She learned to speak about her experiences, helped by therapists and the unshakable presence of Clover. The bond between the two was a source of comfort, not just to her, but to everyone who saw them together. At school, Lily was welcomed back by friends and teachers, who marveled at her courage. She kept a picture of Clover on her desk, a reminder of how far she had come. Meanwhile, federal and local authorities continued their investigations. The raid had opened the door to dismantling a larger trafficking ring. Arrests were made, trials scheduled, and slowly, justice was served. Detective Rowan reflected on the case in quiet moments. Sometimes, he told Megan, it's not just about the evidence or the leads. Sometimes, it's about a dog showing up at the right place, at the right time. Megan nodded, glancing at Clover. The best kind of detective. One afternoon, Megan took Clover for a walk in the park. As they strolled, a young boy ran up and threw a stick. Clover chased it eagerly, tail wagging. Megan smiled and knelt beside him. You did more than save a life, she said. You saved many. Clover looked up, eyes warm and understanding, as if he knew exactly what she meant. Their journey had started with a scratch at the police station door. It had led to a hidden world brought into the light. And though the past could never be erased, there was now a future, a new beginning filled with hope, healing, and love. And for Clover and Lily, that was everything.